unleashing female power.
Being a disruptor.
I'm always constantly telling the truth.
I love
art. That's all her life.
She's alive and female.
Being a woman, what it meant.
Prove him wrong.
Girls run the world.
We're rocking the place.
Welcome to the Art Pod. I'm your host, Carolina, and I'll be your guide through this Pandora's box. Strap yourselves in for a journey through the art world where we bring you candid conversations, untold stories, uncover industry secrets, and celebrate the women who are shaping its future. Because in the Art Pod, the spotlight is always on the girls. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Art Pod. My guest today is Beatrice Scaccia. Welcome, Bea.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Of course. I'm so happy to have you. You're one of my favorite people. So Bea was born in Veroli, Italy in 1978. She earned her BA and MFA at the Accademia di Belle Arti in Rome, studying with Gino Marotta. In 2011, she moved to New York City, where she currently lives and works. In her paintings, Bea reworks the elements that collectively give rise to illusions of beauty and constructions of appearance, and compresses them on the canvas as surreal, uncanny marks of affectation. Investigating the cultural links between feminine splendor and monstrosity, she builds pictorial compositions that can be read as true parodies of bon ton. Solo exhibitions include Art Brussels, Marilyn Mercier Brussels? JDJ Tribeca, New York, the Katona Museum of Art in New York, Cuci Fritos, Gallery in New York, Galleria Ugo Ferranti in Rome. Group exhibitions include Harper's Singapore, Harper's New York, PMAM London, Analog Diary in New York, Sergeant's Daughters West, Los Angeles, Galleria Nazionale in Rome, Magazine Italian Art in New York, the Center for the Less Good Idea in Johannesburg, American University's Katzen Arts Center, Washington, D.C. Her work is present in important public and private collections, including the William Louis Dreyfus Foundation and the Portland Museum of Art. All right, let's just dive right into it. I want to start a little bit with talking about your newest body of work, some of which was shown at Art Brussels and Marilyn Mercier in Gallery this spring. For those who might not be familiar with your work, can you tell us a little bit about what it is, kind of the overarching themes?
Yes, of course. So I started working on these paintings fairly recently because it was 2021. Because before I was more focused on drawings and animation. And then I decided to, my passion always been painting. So I decided actually to, let go and try. Visually, I would say that I build up compositions of elements that are usually linked to stereotypical aspects of beauty, femininity, sentimental culture, pop culture, domesticity. But I try to combine them in a way that is extremely disturbing and unsettling. We will talk about it more later probably, but it's really like the way I see the world. I always see that there is always something that is reassuring, that is linked to something that is extremely dark. Technically, because I think that's important too, I work with acrylic on canvas. I prep my canvases. I use a cotton that I like way better than linen because it has some resistance that I can use. And I mix every paint with the gesso because I hate shiny surface. Yeah. I think it would be too much for my composition. So I love that the surface of my paintings are actually pretty muted and quiet, and they almost look like charcoal, or like chalk on blackboards. And I like that idea of that fragility in the way they appear, while the compositions are very arrogant in some ways, because they are over the top.
I love it because when you first look at your work, it's automatically it's so beautiful because you have these lush, fabrics and furs and wigs. And then the more you look at it, you're right, there's this unsettlement that is in the painting. And then you stand there wondering where it's coming from. And you touched a little bit on the technical aspects of your work about kind of how you mix the paints and what kind of canvas do you use. Can you talk a little bit about how you set up these scenes? Do you use props? Do you sketch before you start? How do you usually begin a piece?
Yes, so that's another interesting theme because when I began painting, because I got trained as a realist painter and I was making a living painting for other artists, I thought I needed a reference. And that's not easy for the ideas I had in mind. So I began buying an enormous amount of props.
Okay.
My apartment is pretty creepy if you open the drawers because they are still there. So I bought wigs, princess outfit, tiaras, purse, everything I could find. I even found on eBay that they would sell like cheap jewelry. They would get stuck together in the drawers, so you could get a bunch of that.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty funny too. And they were very cheap, so I bought that too. And then I would try to combine them on my floor or on the wall, take a photo, edit something on Photoshop, and then print it out. And by the time I would get to the print, I was already bored. It was not something I really needed to paint anymore. And also my vision was much more complicated than the one I could achieve with actual objects. So I began sketching instead. And then little by little, I really didn't need anything anymore. I approached the painting almost like an abstract artist. I prepped the canvas, then I put some major lines. I fill up the space. I decide basic things like how much void I want in the work. And then I make a list of the elements I would like to include. So those can go from, like a candle, purse, jewels, a tiara, some wigs, a cat, a owl, and I put the list close by the canvas, and then I start painting. So it's really like refreshing because I don't know what's going to happen. I never know what is going to happen. And I alternate moments in which I let go completely. So I just paint, and moments in which I need some rational thoughts to decide some stuff. But I'm always engaged and I'm always surprised. So I love that I got to this kind of method now.
Yeah. You're always in the studio. Whenever I talk to you, you're spending days there. How long does a painting usually take to complete, start to finish for you? Or is it different for every single one?
Yeah, it is different, but I do have a rhythm, which is kind of neurotic. So it's not, I stay in the studio until I'm exhausted, and I don't exhaust easily. So usually it's 12 hours.
Wow.
Sometimes. And I paint on more than one work at the same time. So it's hard to understand how much it takes for one single work, because what I do, considering now, I'm not that young anymore. So I know my personality. I know how to manage it. So I'm so obsessive that I need more than one work. So when I get stuck on one, I can move on quickly on the other one, and I keep going. Because when I was in a small studio and I could manage only one painting at the time, sometimes I would ruin it because I kept going when I was not supposed to. But I do produce works a lot. I'm not a slow painter. I have I think my brush strokes are quick. I can achieve a lot, in particular at the beginning. And then it slows down toward the ends because there is a lot of distance you have to get from your work before finishing it.
Yeah. And then I noticed you also have various sizes of works. Sometimes they're smaller, sometimes they're very big. I think the last one you showed me, they're like meant to be 3 together that were being shown side by side. Which kind of format do you prefer to work in? Larger or smaller?
Larger.
Okay.
It's actually humbling. It's not the opposite. Sometimes you think because it's big, it's because you want to show off something. But actually, to me, it's the process. And in the larger work, I get completely lost, and I feel I have to battle. Like it's a challenge. It's a real challenge, and I feel very small doing that. So in a way, it protects me more. I don't know. There is something very fascinating about that. And also, I don't get bored. On the small surface, sometimes it's too fast. And then the tricky part with a painter that got trained in the way I got trained is that you don't want to get too into the details, too polished. So the bigger size allows me also not to do that, not to get too precious about things.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So this body of work, this newer body of work, incorporates, as you've mentioned, darkness. In a figurative and literal sense, your backgrounds are these lush, matte black surroundings that almost sink your objects into a void, but at the same time have this strange magic to them. Like we're backstage behind like a curtain waiting for something to happen, or watching a scene take place at night. And a night, as we know, is this mystical, scary shroud sometimes. Can you talk a little bit about how you set up these scenes?
So the darkness, it's really like a major theme. I don't want to become too dark even now,
Okay.
but I think about mortality all the time. Like I grew up thinking about it, and I believe that my paintings can be seen also as memento mori. Like remember you must die, something like that, because there is always these. They are leftover of identities of. They are symbolic in a way, but the figure is not there. So there is always a sadness that is included in the canvas. And darkness, to me, it's a way to express that better because I can choose my own light, and I can make something that is very familiar, like, a beautiful fabric, look a little bit disturbing. Because I really believe that underneath any shiny surface, everything we experience that is beautiful, there is always something extremely dark that try to win over our feelings. And that's the way I see the world. So and also I believe that our first memories are important when you become an artist, but in general in life. And I think I grew up in my first 10 years of my life were in a huge house, unfinished, with no central heating, so we only had a fireplace wintertime. So there was this major light, this major fire, and then everything was dark around. And as a kid, it's actually fun. So like I had siblings and cousins, we were always running around and playing in the dark. So there is also something that I feel it's connected to the way I grew up. But it's mostly the vision I have of everything. I'm lately trying to work on different tones for the backgrounds. It's never gonna be daytime in my paintings, but I'm planning to make like a twilight idea, like more like a reddish oranges, and in contrast with the light source I usually choose in my composition.
That's interesting because I feel like twilight and like dawn, those are like times of change, obviously between day and night. So it's interesting that you're exploring that subject,
because
like that background.
I read so much. I'm such a nerd, and I remember reading about something besides the wallflower that is popular, but I was reading about that every metamorphosis in fairy tales and in mythology and literature in general happens during those moments of transformation. That is usually when it's not day, it's not night yet, the in between. And also I believe I love liminal atmosphere, so there is nothing, more than that. It doesn't get better than that.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. Speaking a little bit about change and transformation and performance, there's a lot of performance in your works also, in different aspects, from objects that you paint, which can be used for performative aspects, to the ideas of dress up and even gender roles, which can often be outwardly performative. Can you talk a little bit about this performative aspect in your work?
Yes, of course. It's a major theme. Because it has been a major theme even in my previous work. So it has been there forever. I believe, I believe we all perform. We are performing right now.
Every day.
We perform all the time. And when I moved here, I actually found very interesting, because English is my second language. So I would get stuck on some way of saying, like put oneself together, or make up your face. I remember a friend of mine say, "Oh, let's wait, I have to make up my face." And there was, what? Like, you don't have a face otherwise. It makes you feel, like being in shape or out of shape. Which one is the shape we are referring to? Like there is always this idea that we are puppets. Even in the language, you can feel that. And but to be honest, I really believe, like I told you before, that there is always a connection to childhood. And I believe church is very, like, I got obsessed with performance because I grew up Catholic. And I remember I had these crazy I don't know, changes. Like my weekdays were completely wild. I could be, dressed with nothing, run in the fields and do whatever I wanted. But then Saturday night, I needed to wear like the crazy hair rollers and sleep with those.
Oh my God, yes.
So I had to wear them overnight because my hair, it's this one. So, and wear a dress the day after and go to church with my grandma. And even my grandma was a wild lady, so she would like play cards, curse, kill animal because she was a farmer all week. And then Sunday would come and we were there behaving a completely different way. It was so awkward. And then I was not dressing up to go to a party. I was dressing up to go to this dark, cold place with a priest telling us what we were supposed to do. And that was a crazy performance to me, because no one was behaving in a genuine way. So I think that was my first impression of what being human means. And then I remember in high school, I began reading about the existential parade performances in books like In Praise of Folly by Erasmus da Rotterdam, and The Laughter by Henri Bergson, in which he thought about the comicity that we have within us. And we are always, like this broken performance. So it's been there forever, and it's the way I perceive reality in general.
No, I completely agree with you, because I feel like, as you mentioned, we perform every day, because the personality that you have with your friends is not the same one that you have at work, for example. And even gender roles, I feel like, are performative. It's like, what do I have to do to be a woman, or what do I have to do to be a man? And then, you have those aspects that, can be labeled as feminine or masculine and things like that. So I feel like, in essence, we are performing every day in our lives. And like, which version of ourselves is the real one?
I think there is no real version, but there is a big it's important to understand if the performance you are reenacting every day is the one you choose for yourself, or the one that someone forced you to wear, so that's the main difference. Because I think performing can be also an action of resistance. Like if all women have to perform a certain way, as a woman you decide to perform in a completely different way, that's still a performance, but it's closer to the way you want to be.
Yeah.
So it's very it can be very courageous.
Yeah. Speaking of performance, obviously performance also carries the notions of artifice. And I'm just thinking, like actors becoming different people for these movies, which is technically fake. It's not real. Like the dressing up, the hiding, the masking, the changing. How does this theme play out in your work? Do you feel like transformation can be seen as an evolution, or as artifice, or both?
Yeah, I think masking is linked completely to the idea of performing. I don't see that in a negative way all the time. Sometimes I do, but I feel the act of masking can be transformative. And also, even when I paint, while I paint, the idea that I can put elements that represent completely different things in the same composition, all these masks that in a way represent a larger idea of identities. But I do believe identities are connecting to masking, and identities are shape-shifting.
Yeah.
They're not static. We are always transforming. And I'm afraid when people don't evolve, they don't wear different clothes and different masks in their lifetime. Italy, it's a place extremely static, that is kind of against transformation. And even in the identities, you can see that, like my friends that stayed in Italy, they have a tendency they want to be coherent. And I think we shouldn't be coherent. We should be able to change and to wear different masks every day, because that's the only way we can, you know, become more authentic. It seems like a paradox,
yeah.
but I think I really believe that's, the more the more masks you wear, the more performance you reenact, the more you have a chance to understand really what you want to be.
Yeah. It's interesting because this morning I was getting ready for this podcast and I was putting on makeup, obviously, and I was thinking about you, like the masking, the performative aspects of it. And I'm like, yes, we're going to get into this during the conversation. But it's interesting, like, this, especially even the makeup that women wear,
Yeah.
as this performative aspect, and all these like excessive wigs and clothing that people would wear during like the Rococo period and everything like that. And then I feel like, at what point do we kind of start to become more minimal? Because you
Yes.
can see like clothing, makeup, wigs changing over centuries and people kind of like muting down a little bit more.
Yeah. I really believe every time there is a Baroque period, and I do believe we are in one, uh, kind of Baroque, it's very ornamental, this period. There is a deep fear behind it, like so I when there is a more a minimal style, it's usually a period in which there is a safety around the news, society, everything that goes on. And also, like, it depends on who is in power, like
Yeah.
the gender, I love this moment for what's going on with fashion and what's going on with everything, like, because I feel it's more liberating. It's less what it's supposed to be, like, about on women there is so much pressure to perform in a certain way, to wear certain masks, and you have to be careful not to become grotesque, because that's they cannot wait for that to
Yeah.
happen. So that's always around the corner.
I forgot where I read this, but somebody wrote that everything is a response to its predecessor. So when minimalism is usually like a response to over excess, or when people have too much going on, and then minimalism takes place, and then people get bored of that, so they're like, okay, now we're going to go back and clutter our surfaces. So when a lot of people were talking about, I think this was an interior design conversation, because people were saying that millennials, after the boomer generation, tended to have their homes become much more minimal and with muted tones in their home, because they grew up with such an over excess, in like the 80s and the 90s from their parents in their homes. I mean, I can vouch for that, because like I grew up in Poland and our house still is very much, relics, religious paintings everywhere, just a whole bunch of stuff crammed into one room. And obviously my apartment is the complete opposite. It's just like 3 pieces of furniture. So it's interesting to think about this concept as always a response to something else.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's really it's always yeah, I agree. I never thought about it, but it does make sense a lot, even in my experience with everything that connects with the interiors.
Yeah. Speaking of interiors and objects, many of the objects that you paint are also signifiers of artificial beauty. Like you use jewelries, accessories, wigs. I want to talk a little bit about this idea of the illusions of feminine beauty and the constructions of appearance, which you talk about a lot in your work. You often teeter the line between the feminine splendor and monstrosity, and build these pictorial compositions that can be read as parodies. Can you tell us a little bit more about that theme?
Yes. It's I think my works contains different layers of themes, and this is one of my most important ones. I observe the world thinking always that everything beautiful can turn monstrous in general, but that's very true for women, because we have so much pressure on ourselves, so we are not supposed to age. We are supposed to live life in a certain way. And even if we believe that we are, that's the past, it's not, because we can see it. It's still very much around, this idea. And I began reading some amazing books actually that I had no clue existed before. Marina Werner wrote a book From the Beast to the Blonde that says
Oh,
already everything about
okay. I need to
and
read that.
in which she talks about fairy tales and how the transformation of monstrosity happened from a genderless monster of the past. With the history of capitalism, little by little the genderless monster turned into a feminine monster. So even a monster like Sheila, I think that this was in another book, but a monster like Sheila moved from being a genderless, shapeless monster in Virgilio in something that was very pretty and very feminine until the crotch and then monstrous underneath.
Mhm.
So there is it's connected to the way the society see women, a society sees women. And there is an amazing book by Jess Zimmerman that is titled Women and Other Monsters.
Okay, very apt.
So it's always about mythology, fairy tales, and how these archetypical figures never change, So we are still witches, we are still cat ladies, we are still on the verge of becoming something that is appalling. And the youth is always the thing we have to achieve, even when it's impossible to do so. So in my paintings, I work on. It's actually pretty refreshing to me to work on it because I feel it's my personal form of resistance.
Mhm.
Because when I make this composition, thinking about all these elements that are pretty and beautiful, and then I make them unappealing and disturbing and unsettling and over the top, I also think, what is a monsters are terrifying. And I don't mind being terrifying,
Mhm.
Sometimes that's what we need, So it's very important, as with the performance and with the masking, to remember that artifice is not negative. It's also something that deeply belongs to us. Everything we put on ourselves is the screen between our interior and the world. So it's always there. We cannot live without it. So it's a form of resistance also to underline that, that incredible connection between beauty and disturbing elements.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that because I feel like with, the monstrosity, otherwise, I mean, when you become a monster, and you mentioned that, you look grotesque, and obviously there's a fear that comes with it. And I feel like with fear, there's also power. Because when somebody's scared of you, you have power over them, and, you can scare them, and so there is a certain power that comes with it. But thinking of myths and these fairy tales, because I mean I grew up on really dark fairy tales in Poland, like Grimm's fairy tales. Like, these women were either portrayed as these beautiful women or complete monsters. There was like no in between. And there weren't always happy endings like the Disney versions.
No, yes.
Like, there are some fairy tales that I still remember, like these women, making sweaters with their hands made out of like nettle, and nettle burns and
Oh, wow.
stings. And then you had like obviously your hands were destroyed and things like that. And all these women at some point transformed into something grotesque, or just took the shape of an animal, so that men wouldn't either wouldn't recognize them or would leave them alone, which is an interesting concept. So I like the idea that you bring up these fairy tales and these women that existed in them under this guise of either a monster or some sort of transformed animal.
Yeah, there is always a metamorphosis taking place in fairy tales, and usually it's a way to escape some male attention. Like donkey skin was the focus of my body of work for Art Brussels, because this princess needs to hide underneath a donkey skin, a very dirty one, to escape her father that wanted to marry her. And
Yeah,
that's a
which
fairy
is
tale.
disturbing.
Yeah, but it's always like a women either die in fairy tales. If they're good ones, they die.
Yeah.
If they're evil ones, they survive. but it's very basic. There are not many nuances there, And I even in Silvia Federici wrote these amazing books about witch hunt, and she tries to explain that through the lens of capitalism and patriarchy, and it's pretty fascinating because we have been always the outsiders. We have been always been like there is always a fight against the gender in any period.
It's interesting that you bring up witches. I don't know why, but last week I was listening to this podcast about the Torshäcker witch trials, which were actually witch trials that took place right before Salem that happened in America, but these were in Sweden. And it's this really interesting story about how one male child essentially condemned like almost 70 women to be killed.
Yeah.
Because of something that happened that he felt kind of destroyed his ego, because he essentially it's a very complicated story, but essentially what happened was like he blamed this little girl that he was with for saving like this herd of goats, and he said it was because she's a witch and she could walk on water, and this kind of like started this whole cascade of these men starting to interrogate these women who were like associated with the little girl, and then the little girl was essentially tortured and forced to give names of people who weren't witches to them, and it just kept going and going because every person who then they took into custody had to blame somebody else because they were tortured too, and it was just like this massive landslide, but like the sort of fear that was embedded in this against women was absolutely insane. At one point, this man wrote I forgot what the book was called, the Maleficent.
Oh, yes. Yes.
You know which one I'm talking about. And it was this entire book about how women are witches and how to deal with them. But there was so much just hatred towards women in general and sexism in that book. And the fact that they use that to then, create these sort of trials against, like, the whole thing was just absolutely insane. I can't believe that even took place.
Yes.
But like that embedded hatred for women, I think, is what I really took away from it, which was really frightening, honestly.
Yeah, because it was a question of power, I think Silvia Federici writes about the fact that in that period, mostly were women helping other women giving birth, and then the medicine got into the hands of men, so that was partially the reason why the witch hunt started too. They didn't want women to have any power over that discipline and that doctrine anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up healing, because this was also mentioned in the podcast that a lot of these women were healers, and healing was only limited to priests and doctors at that time, who were all men, and no one else could heal anybody. And when women did, they were seen as witches, which is crazy to me because they're actually performing a service to help others.
Yeah.
So it was just very wild, honestly, when I heard about this, because I never knew about it. Obviously I knew about the Salem witch trials, but I didn't know about this happening in Sweden. And I was just like, oh my God, this was insane. Like, how can people live like this? It's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, but now that we've gone off on a tangent about witches and witch trials
that needed to be happening.
Exactly. Can you tell us a little bit what's coming up next for you?
Yes, so I'm working on, I have a busy year ahead of me. I'm working on my solo show, Moriani Mercier, in Brussels, then on a museum show curated by Bonami, and then on several group shows. And then I have this animation in my mind that I hope to realize when I will finally get to Marea, the residency program in Praiano, that is founded by Carol Lewitt. So it's going to be all in 2025, I think.
Wow, yeah, that's going to be your year.
It's busy.
Yeah, that's which one is coming up first in 2025?
So I'm having the group shows first, one in Madrid, and one is always in Brussels. And then I think the first one is the solo show, Moriani.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to those. I want to see what's going on. I mean, I got to visit your studio and see a little bit behind the scenes of what you're working on, and I absolutely love it. So I'm super excited for you.
Thank you, Carolina.
Okay, let's backtrack a little bit to before your artistic career. You were born in Italy, as you've mentioned, and you grew up in a small town south of Rome. And then you went on to study and live in Rome for a little bit before moving to the States. We had a lovely conversation when I came to visit your studio about growing up in these small towns, because obviously I did too. And then you wrote this incredible text for Nero titled A Tiny Town South of Rome, where you touch a little bit about your upbringing. People often people often come in with cultural stereotypes, especially when you say you're from like a country like Italy, which everybody knows, even if they haven't visited. And when you say you grow up in a certain country and you see it a different way than most people do, and living there is completely different than what people may think it is like. At one point in your text, you talk about missing home, but you describe it as the same way I would miss not having a mirror in my bathroom. Can you tell us a little bit about this experience of growing up in this small town in Italy? Because I know it's affected a lot of how you work on your work.
Yes. It's a very tiny town. So it's I love going back now. When I go to Italy, actually, I cannot wait to spend days there doing nothing, walking around and say hi to the butcher and talk to people. But when I was a kid, I loved it. It got difficult when I got to the teenage years, because I felt I was trapped there. But it's very different from the idea of Italy people have here. No, so every time I talk about Italy, they think I grew up going to the Uffizi every Sunday. So you feel, well, actually not. So I had nothing around. It was all fields and the church. The church is the major stage in these kind of towns. Everything happens around that reality. Now it's different, but back then it was like that. And my family was not among the luckiest one for many reasons, because we experienced loss many times early in life. And also financially, we were not stable at all. My dad worked in construction. My mom was an elementary school teacher. They wanted to be a psychologist, but couldn't afford to go to college. But there was, to make you laugh, I'm going to tell you, like the first time I left Italy to go somewhere else was in junior high, and I went to Lourdes.
Oh, okay.
For the Virgin Mary, with a bus filled of elderly ladies from my hometown, my grandmother and the priest. And I was the only girl probably there. Maybe there was an older one, but we didn't play. It was terrible, but it was kind of, like surreal experience. So there was nothing besides the church, television, books. I began reading very early in life. I don't think I ever seen a painting in my hometown. Maybe the Madonna in the church, but it was probably a bad one. I don't even remember it. So I had no visual art at all. I had just books and this small community. But there is something good about growing up playing outside and being, because you kind of, the magical thinking process gets over the top over there, because you can make up whatever you want.
Yeah, you have to use your imagination.
Yeah, but there is something I always think now, since I moved here. I was talking to a friend of mine years ago, and he told me, what did you watch growing up in Italy? And I realized, just the things you watched, which is surreal, because Italy doesn't have any Italian program for kids. We just use the American programs. So I grew up watching kids with lockers and cheerleaders and crazy things, and my hometown was, that one. So I think it creates a bit of an issue in identity, that you consume so much pop culture that comes from a country that you never visited, that it doesn't even resemble a little bit the one you're living in. So it's a big issue.
Yeah. No, but you were telling us about this trip to Lourdes in France. That
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, because there is not much more to, I remember we got there and I had to walk barefoot to go to see the Virgin Mary, and there were so many sick people.
Mhm.
That's an insane experience for a young girl, but
Yeah.
that's a trip that I could go to, which is I don't know what my grandma was thinking. It was not, of course, was not for me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you mentioned that, like, the first kind of art that you were exposed to were these, church paintings and things like that. And then I started thinking about it. I'm just like, when I was little, that's the only kind of art we had in the house too. It was either like photographs of like Jesus and Mary. I don't even know if they were photoshopped or where they were from, or like paintings of like the Last Supper.
Yeah.
The ones that I really love though, and they really stay with me, is sometimes we would have like these well, they weren't really paintings because they were made out of wood, but they were like carved of um the the Black Madonna, because the Black Madonna is very special to Poland.
Okay.
And she had this scar on her face. Um
Oh, I think I saw it.
yeah,
Yes.
maybe.
Yes.
And she had this scar on her face that went from like her nose down to her like mouth. And it's interesting because when I was a child, I had an accident where my friend was on a swing and the swing hit me in the face, and it was a metal swing, so it cut my face, and I still have the scar
Yeah.
right here. And I would like cry about it, and I was like so upset that it was like on my face. And then my grandma would always tell me, "Oh, think of the Black Madonna, which also has the scar on her face." I'm like, "Grandma, what?" I'm like, I don't want this on my face. No, but it's interesting because we had the first concepts of art were these, Catholic images and all these things. So I feel like that's interesting. That you also experienced that as
Yeah,
well.
it's interesting because you really don't have. I think the first time I got to a proper museum was actually when I was already 19
Mhm.
or 18. Maybe I did go to some school trip, but you don't go to school trips to check art, so I don't remember much of it. But yeah, I had books. I remember reading books about Michelangelo and things that I had around, but they were very basic. They were the one my grandmother had,
Yeah.
like. So my passion developed. I was still drawing and painting and doing everything because I loved doing that. But I was more influenced by pop culture and comics than actual art, like visual art.
Yeah. So after growing up in your little small town, you went to school in Rome, and then you got your BA and your MFA at the Accademia di Belle Arti in Rome, studying with Gino Marotta. Can you tell us a little bit about how your education kind of helped you? What did you find the most useful about your studies? Because I have no idea how the school system works in
Mm,
Italy.
Yeah, the academy is not a great place,
Hmm.
but I think the most important thing for me was to study with Gino Marotta.
Okay.
So, first of all, when I finished the high school, that's another thing about my hometown. You don't get to pick the high school you want to go to. You get to pick the only one that kind of works, because they are like, they have a reputation, they are
Mhm.
few. So I ended up going to a scientific high school with a focus on chemistry. So I wanted to draw and paint, but I also wanted to write. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna try to get into the academia, and if I don't get in, I go to literature. And then I got in, and my first professor was not a good one, so I was very depressed, and I began stalking Gino Marotta outside of class. And every day I would ask him, can I come with you? Can I move with you? And then finally he said yes. And it changed my life. We got very close. We were arguing all the time at the beginning, but they adopted me. So him and his wife and their dog too, they kind of opened their house to me. So I began working with him when I was in my second year. So he would bring me paint in the academy because he knew I didn't have money, so he would just bring me paint and say, don't tell anyone. And then I began working with them, and I had this crazy amount of books I could read because he told me everything here is for you. So get your books, read here, study here, do whatever you want. So that changed completely my life. So I went from knowing nothing about art history and visual art,
Mhm.
besides the few things you learn in high school, to this incredible amount of information. And because I'm a nerd, I got kind of overwhelmed. I studied all the time. So it did change my life completely. Sometimes I wonder what I would have been without meeting him, and I had no idea. It's one of those mentor figure that shapes you a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned you were trained as a realist painter.
Yeah.
Does that mean that there was a lot of influence from like the Flemish Renaissance, the Renaissance, all that stuff, which obviously you can kind of also see in your
Yes.
current work?
Yes. Gino was a strange professor because actually in his own practice, he was making plastic sculptures and it was very avant-garde. But he wanted us to paint in a certain way, and he wanted to learn to paint that way. So we began using glazing, painting in the Flemish way. And we got to a point in which we got a little bit too fanatic. So we were, prepping the panel with gesso, a Bologna gesso and the rabbit glue. And I had a notebook filled with recipes to make all the preps.
That's your chemistry from high school.
Yeah. And I used to make my colors started from pigment. But those things can be dangerous when you're young. So after too much, I realized that wasn't helping me. But it was amazing to study like that. And also studying in Rome is pretty spectacular. You get to see everything you want to see. Historically, there is so much.
Yeah. It's interesting because like now, obviously, artists tend to just use like store-bought acrylic or oil paints and everything's kind of like pre-made for you. Last year I went on a trip to the Netherlands and they were showing us how pigment like was made in like mills back in the day and how paint was actually mixed to make the oil paints that these Flemish artists would use and stuff like that. And it was so interesting how intricately they had to work on just to create the tools that they needed to make the art. So I feel like nowadays it's much easier.
It is much easier, but I think it's also good to know a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah,
because
100%.
I know, because I got into the phase, I know how to use colors, and I know which, even in the tube paint, I know which one has too much pigment, which one I can recognize the brand's qualities too. And also it's good to know how to glaze and how to use the power of each color instead of premixing everything like many artists do. It's a strength for sure.
Yeah. So then in 2011, you moved to New York City where you currently live and work. Can you tell us a little bit about why you chose New York City and how the experience was coming here, finding work, finding yourself, finding your practice?
Why I chose New York City is not easy. I fell in love. But why I decided to come here is probably because of the I was culturally colonized by this country. So New York is always, a place you need to go to because I grew up watching movies set in New York. And it was part of my memory sometimes, like in some ways. But as soon as I came, after saving some money, I stayed 1 month. And after 2 weeks, I already had an immigration lawyer. That's how quick it was. Yeah, I was not happy in Rome. Rome can be, as a student I was, but when I began working in Rome, it got very overwhelming in a negative way. I felt I had too much energy for the city and not enough privilege to live like the other artists in Rome were living. So I was not happy. And New York, I felt there was so much accessibility to me in this city. The amount of art I could see for free, the amount of contemporary art I could get exposed to. And then I remember I went to the Lower East Side print shop. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it was open 24 hours a day to me was shocking. I kept calling my friends in Rome and saying, "Oh, they open 24 hours. I can go work at midnight." To me, that was incredible because I had so much energy. I wanted to make art. And in Rome, everything is very slow. You cannot fight against that. So I loved it. Now I love it a little bit less because I know it too much.
Yeah.
But I still think it's a beautiful place. It challenges, and my practice changed. Everything changed. My life changed. I felt so much more genuine and more authentic here than in Rome in general.
So you came here
Yeah.
starry-eyed, loving New York. How did you begin like finding yourself and your practice here?
Oh, it was tough because I came here with maybe 2,000 in my
Mhm.
bank account. So I was living with a roommate that could give me the room for so cheap because she was sleeping on the couch. So
Okay.
that was her bedroom. So it was a strange, yeah, but I loved her. So I don't know. I was so stubborn that I began working right away. I was working as a babysitter,
Mhm.
and I rented out a small studio in Greenpoint, and I began making drawings, and then I began going to the Lower East Side print shop. I wanted to have a community, so I began trying to, you know, to work around people at the beginning more than having a studio by myself. First of all, because I couldn't afford it, but also because I wanted to be around people from this city. And then I got a job at Jeff Koons, and that helped me a lot because I believe in the power of habits.
Mhm.
So having a structure instead of going from one gig to the other and moving like crazy helped me to build up my practice more, and also it gave me a community, a strong community. Some of my best friends are still the one I met there. My partner is from those days, so it kind of grounded me in everything. But so it's I think I was pretty lucky in this city since the beginning because besides the first 5 6 months while I was babysitting, the rest was pretty okay. I never struggled too much to find a way to survive.
You know, it's interesting because this happened to me when I moved to London. You go out of your way to like meet people and, do things because you want to create this sense of community for yourself, which is obviously really important. But like when you live somewhere for a long time, you do the opposite. You're like, I don't want to be around people. Like, I'm done. Don't invite me to anything. Thank you.
Yes.
So, and a lot of people mentioned that on my other episodes, like the first thing that they really found important to them was this sense of community with artists, with galleries, and building kind of like a little home base for yourself.
Yes, and it's pretty, like, I think it's unique. New York is pretty unique about that. I mean, there are contemporary art galleries everywhere, but
Oh
the
yeah.
community that is here is not the same. Because I have friends in Berlin, I have friends in Asia, I have friends in London. It's not the same. Here it's, I don't know, there is something more accessible in the way
Yeah.
things are structured.
Yeah, because a lot of people from New York aren't from New York. So,
Yeah, that's what
I
makes
feel
it.
like there's more
Yeah.
acceptance in that sense.
Yes, it's not territorial like
Yeah.
in other places.
Yeah, everyone's kind of welcome here. Okay. So we talked a little bit about you coming from this realist background as a painter, um, and studying in Italy, which itself has a very long and famous history of art and tradition, as we know. How did this history and this culture impact the work you started making early on?
He impacted it in a negative way.
Okay.
I after the academy, I had learned so much about techniques and art history that I couldn't function as a painter. I would protect myself with my knowledge, all these preps and the recipes and everything I knew about colors, but then I didn't really know how to find my voice and my path. So I believe that sometimes knowing too much can be a little bit of a limit. So what I did was kind of bold. I always say I put myself on a strict diet. So I got rid of everything after a few years in Rome after I studied. I really got rid of everything from my studio, even my easel paints, everything. And I just bought paper and pencils, and I decided to start over. And that actually worked because my first solo show ever at Ugo Ferranti in Rome was composed by maybe over 70 tiny drawings, 6 by 6 inches, that were all around the gallery. So that was my first solo show, and the team was already there because it was a character that they would dress up with feminine clothes, then masculine clothes, and then random accessories and ornaments, and then they would just give up and fall asleep. So it was kind of a narrative build in a way that was almost a frame by frame structure. So that was refreshing to me. So it took me a while to go back to paint because of that, because I was terrified. I think I have so much respect for the medium that when I was very young, I just couldn't find a way to express what I wanted with that medium.
You know, it's really interesting that you bring up that like knowing too much can actually hinder you, which I have been saying like my entire life. And why I love going to museums and galleries with people who don't have an art background, because they see things completely differently than I do. And even just because my little niece wants to be an artist, which I always tell her, please don't. But when she like paints or like she sees something, it's completely different. Obviously, she has innocent eyes, but I always look at it from the perspective of I will never see art that way again in my life, because my whole thing about art is referential, because I know so much art history and I've been working in the field for so long that I will never see art with fresh eyes like that ever again. So it's interesting how people can see things differently based on the knowledge that they have consumed throughout their life.
Yeah, because sometimes you can break the rules because you don't know there are
Exactly.
rules, so it's it makes it easier. But you can learn, and if you, I always trick myself into doing things in a way that it's different from what is supposed to be. So you can trick yourself into working in a different way all the time, even with knowledge.
Yeah. But speaking of your earlier work, talk to me a little bit about Little Gloating Eve, one of your earliest projects.
Oh, that was so fun. Yeah, so basically from my show Ugo Ferranti, that I had this character that was playing out with, dressing up all the time. When I moved here, I don't remember why the name. I remember Eve. Eve, I picked it because it can be read both ways, and I love that. And also, it's the first woman in the Bible, so it was my first character, and it's some sort of alter ego. So a friend of mine, former friend of mine, I haven't seen her forever. She gave me a animal hat for Christmas, my first Christmas here, and I began playing around with that at home. And then I added other elements, and the character was born. So the animal hat, the tail, a pillow underneath the belly to fake pregnancy or fake like a different shape, and patterns all around. And with that character, I began building a whole crazy thing, So I made animations, I made drawings. I collaborated with other artists. So Lionel Lequeriel, that is a French composer, made a soundtrack for the character. Toshiaki Noda made ceramics for some projects I needed to have in Milan and in New York. And then I even ended up, and that was the most fun, I ended up asking the children of my former elementary school to draw actions for the character. So they say, like Eve plays soccer, and I have all these drawings in a book that I made for them. And so after they gave me all the actions, I made animation with Eve performing those actions. So Eve plays soccer, Eve flies, Eve cooks. They were very funny. Some were very basic, and some were a little bit more challenging. So it was always this idea of basically I made my own commedia dell'arte costume in my way. Like it was really something that allowed me to investigate and to be experimental with many techniques. I loved it. It was fun. Like I had 3 shows with it.
Oh,
So,
nice.
Yes.
So there has been like this performative aspects from the very beginning
Yes.
in your work,
Yes.
which is really interesting. So during the pandemic, you were also featured in the exhibition Homemade, where you began to explore animation, and then you went on to have a show at the Katona Museum, where you presented a stop motion animation and site specific wall drawings, all together exploring the links and tensions between tradition and modernity. Can you tell us a little bit about the stop motion and what inspired it and how you construct these characters? Because it's obvious that this has been present in your practice from the beginning, really.
Yes. Yes. So I was making already animations,
Mhm.
but they were very short. They were usually looped, so there was not a narrative. It was about a stuck action. But then those are the things that we are kind of thankful the pandemic for. You don't know how to say that, but because of the pandemic, I was at home, and I decided actually to try to make stop motion animation. That was always something that I wanted to try, but I thought it was too complicated for me. So I made my first stop motion animation for Magazzino for
Mhm.
Homemade, and then I got a grant from the Queen's artist, and I could buy actually the software, all the camera, everything that I needed, and I embraced this very ambitious project that was my hope chest.
Mhm.
That was painful. I stayed in the camera, like in my room in the dark for like weeks and weeks, terrified of moving the tripod because I had a small space and I
Mhm.
didn't want to mess it up. Motion animation, it's a painful technique.
Oh yeah.
So there were like thousands and thousands of frames. And I didn't have the skills to make the post production and the editing. So I needed to do everything in a way that I didn't need to pay anyone else to help me, because that was my goal.
Mhm.
So the theme is the hope chest, and that's always connected to the way I grew up, because I was back home before the pandemic, and I was reorganizing my stuff in my former bedroom to help my mom, and I found some linens and tablecloths, and my mom said, "Oh, these are still from your hope chest," and I said, "What?" Like, and so my grandma actually bought me a lot of stuff for my married life.
Oh, like a dowry almost.
Yes. Yeah, that's how it's called too. So I was shocked because we didn't have money. So my mom told me she had to pay monthly payment
Mhm.
for me to have that, and I never used that, and I will never use it. So that made me thinking about this topic, and so I made up this character that is actually stuck into an op chest, a chest,
Mhm.
like, and and is performing the actions that are usually connected with domesticity, so like washing dishes and folding clothes, and then combing hair, and I think dancing with an imaginary partner, several actions. But the most fascinating part of this animation for me was the background, because I didn't know how to do the wording, the letterings for the title and stuff. So I painted the background with blackboard paint, and I began playing with the words. And then it got so fun that for 9 minutes of animation, there are always the thoughts of the character on the board
Mhm.
behind, and creates a crazy effect with the lighting. So that's the most experimental part of the animation. But it was painful because I needed to think, okay, I need to add an A and move the arm
Yeah.
a little bit, and then I need to. So it was. I had so much, like, thinking back, it was incredible to do it. And then the people at the Katona Museum were amazing. So they made me do this thing that I wanted. So I projected the animation. I painted the frame around it, so it looks like a old painting that moves. And then I painted the whole room
Mhm.
with objects and ornaments and hang clothes, wallpaper. It was amazing. And actually, that animation gave me the idea of the atmosphere I wanted my paintings to have. So
How long was the final animation?
almost 10 minutes.
That must have taken you forever. Like 10
Yeah.
minutes of stop motion animation
Yeah.
is no joke. That's a lot of
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, I think I you forget pain.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking to do to make another stop motion animation. I have this idea, and I will
You'll
make
remember it once you start working
but
on it.
yeah, but it will come back.
Yeah.
But I remember I was like, I don't know, I was not even showering at that point. I
Yeah.
was just always there moving
Just
this
very
character.
minute details. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
it's
crazy.
a lot.
What are you thinking about doing now in the future with animation?
Like I want to, yeah.
Yeah. But
Uh,
do you have like any specific plan, or is it just still in the early stages?
So I have an idea that has been with me for a while. So I have this vision of
Mhm.
what I want to make, and it's about a war with trophy characters that communicate among them on the war. So the idea is to realize that when I go to Praiano at the residency program, because I don't believe that when you are there only for a month, you can actually paint. It takes time to get set in the space. So I think an animation project would be something that would be amazing for that
Yeah.
period.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
take the whole month to do like 3 seconds of animation.
Yeah, probably.
So obviously you came to New York, you were a working artist and you needed to make a living. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of your professional trajectory? You already mentioned in this talk that, you did some babysitting, that you worked for Jeff Koons. I know at some point you also worked for Marilyn Minter. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of your professional trajectory in that sense? How, like, what were you doing while you were also making your art?
Yes. I'm gonna say something that I think it can be useful, because when I was in Italy, I studied there too, after studying, after
Mhm.
finishing the academia. And but because I studied there, I could teach with my professor right away. So that's what I was doing. I was being with him in the academia or in another school. And teaching seems something, I love doing that, and I think I'm pretty good at it. But that really affected my studio practice in a negative way, in my opinion. And it took me some time to understand that and to realize why it was not helping. And then when I got to New York, because my English was bad, I didn't even try to get any teaching job. And my degree was in Italy, so I don't think I can use it here. So I began looking for other jobs. And there is this idea that the assistant job is not, some artists don't want to do it.
Mhm.
But to me, it was actually the best, because I got to paint, first of all.
Yeah.
So I was with my headphones all day long painting. And then I would go back to my studio, and I don't know what it is. It's like if I was in myself all day long, even while painting for someone else, I didn't feel any trauma, there was some kind of continuum. So I could go back to my practice and be focused on it. And while I
Yeah.
was painting for other artists, I could actually imagine my own work. So I think that was, it really helped me out a lot. And it's not easy because you have little time, but if you have to survive, you have to do whatever you need to. But I think teaching instead makes you develop a completely different set of skills. And maybe you need to be social, you need to be extroverted, you need to function in a different way. And when you go back to your practice, it takes so long to go back to being a little silly, because in your studio you have to be more like a child. You
Yeah.
have to play around. You don't have to be an adult completely. So I thought, between the two first experiences, because I started over in New York after Rome, I feel that was the strongest one I could have, the one that could help me the most. And I stayed at Jeff for 5 years at Koons, so it was a long time. Then I got the green card, and I could, be on my own a little bit more. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's great. And I mean, you continuously make art in that sense, whether for somebody else, but also for yourself. So you're always
Yes.
immersed in that
Yeah.
creative
I even
aspect.
worked night shift for 1 year
Oh.
because I got a residency program, Artist Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to do that, and I needed time to do it. So I worked night shift at Koons, and I was going to the residency program and sleep in the afternoon.
Oh my God. You are wild.
That was a little too much, maybe. Yeah, but yeah,
And then you worked for Marilyn Minter for how long?
for a few years.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And then what happened after Marilyn Minter?
Studio practice.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and some. I did get lucky with some patrons.
Mhm.
So it was easier to be a little bit braver. Yeah.
Good. And now, speaking of patrons, obviously dealing with collectors can either be a very rewarding or challenging thing for artists and for most people. I know that I know that you've developed a lot of personal relationships with your collector base over the years. Can you share a little bit of your experiences with working with collectors directly?
Mm, in the last few years, it got a little bit different because now I have galleries, so it's more about them.
Yeah.
Managing that. But I did have one of my favorite experiences with collectors was with William Louis Dreyfus. I'm not sure about his collection. Still, I think he was a little quirky. So I didn't like all the pieces he had, but he had this huge collection. And so I got to meet him in 2015, and he died at the end of 2016. So it was not a long time, but he managed to become one of my best friends.
Oh.
And it was 84, and we were such a funny couple. I think we were just going around, checking shows. Going to studio visits. He would drive, which sometimes was a little scary.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But it was very quirky, very opinionated, very funny to be around, so those are I felt so sad when he passed, because he did change the life of many people, many artists. I know that he supported in depth artists for the whole career, sometimes he damaged them too, because he used to buy too much. So I remember after meeting him, he bought few pieces, and then he began already going a little crazy. He wanted to give me a stipend, and because he wanted me to quit the job at Jeff Koons, and it was a little bit too controlling sometimes, so you needed to manage that aspect. But he was an amazing human being. So he gave so much money to the Harlem Children's Zone. He did so much good. So to me, it was amazing to experience such a wealthy person being so down to earth and so generous and so different from what I expected people of that class to be.
To be fair, I mean, I deal with a lot of wealthy people all the time, and it is rare to actually see them be genuinely like philanthropic. Obviously, they like do the support and stuff
Yeah.
like that, but there's a difference between doing it because you're able to and doing it because you actually care about it, and really being supportive in that sense. So it's nice
Yeah.
to meet those types of people.
Yeah, I was extremely curious. I think that was part of the reason why it was so unique. He really felt he needed to know people very well. He was not happy to just meet someone. If he collected an artist, he wanted to know everything about them.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like there's like a collector is either like really adamant about knowing an artist and like being in their life, or they're kind of just like, I love this art, I'm gonna collect it, but like I'll go through the gallery route and I don't really want that relationship with the artist. So there's always like that kind of divide between people. So it's interesting. He clearly wanted to be like best friends with everybody that he was supporting.
Yeah.
Okay, now I usually like to end the podcast with the two final big questions. So the first one for you is, have you faced any particular challenges as a woman working in the field?
Oh, so many. It's hard to point my finger or any specific one, but I think in particular in Italy, uh, it was hard to be taken seriously in general as a female artist. And also sometimes the enemy, it's also in within us. So I feel like I still have to remind myself that I have to take space and I have to be loud sometimes, and I have, I'm entitled to everything that I want to have, because in Italy, being ambitious as a woman is almost like a sin,
Oh yeah.
going back to religion, So it's and when you grow up like that, you have to remind yourself to go against your natural setting all the time, and to build awareness all the time. It's cumulative. It's not something that you learn once. You have to remind yourself over and over what you want to be.
Yeah. And then do you have any advice for incoming generations of women who want to be artists?
Yes, I would say more, not just women in
Mhm.
general, artists in particular, artists that don't come from privilege. So they need to really build up their own path. I would say to them, if you're not obsessed enough, don't do it.
Okay.
If you're not completely, if you can survive without, maybe pick something else. You really have to be so obsessed with your work, so into your own world, so willing to be by yourself, because also you have to deal with yourself all the time. So willing to be alone by yourself, without any validation for such a long time, that if it's not something you are gonna die without, maybe it's not worth the sacrifice.
That's great advice. And I truly, truly believe that as well. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, are you ready for the fire round of questions?
Yes.
Okay, so I have 10 questions. You pick a number, and then I think we have time for like 2 or 3.
Okay.
So pick your first number.
5.
5. What is one thing you're sick of hearing?
That's not an easy one.
None of these are easy.
Yeah. Sick on hearing. I think the feedbacks that I don't need, like
Unwarranted opinions.
yeah, like, but the one that are just on the surface.
Yeah.
I like when people are a little bit meaner and stronger and more honest about that. So when I have studio visits, that things, I can make a distinction between the two.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, next one.
Number 7.
7. What is something that you think everyone should experience in their lifetime?
Doing something completely alone.
Okay, I agree.
Either a trip or like even something smaller for people that really always need someone else to do things.
Yeah.
But yeah, doing something, facing a challenge completely alone without relying
Yeah.
on anyone else.
It's interesting because when I was younger, I used to hate eating and traveling alone. Like I don't know what made me so uncomfortable about it, and now those are the 2 things that I love the most. Like I love taking solo trips.
Me too.
And I feel like you really learn a lot about yourself and how you structure your own time, because obviously when you're traveling with somebody else, you also have to consider them and make sure that everyone's happy on the trip and enjoying the trip, whereas this is just all you.
Yeah.
So you really get to see what you love doing by yourself.
Yes.
Okay, one more.
Number 2.
2. Name a book or film that had a profound influence on your life.
Oh wow. I don't know if I should give you the serious answer or the silly one.
You can do both if you want.
So the serious answer would be, it's a book that no one knows here probably. It's Tommaso Landolfi, La pietra lunare. It's Moonstone. He's a minor writer, although Susan Sarandon loves him. So, and this book is about a lady that changes into a goat at night. But the author is from my area, from Lazio. So the atmospheres are very familiar to me. And I remember reading it and trying to make painting out of that book right away, but I was too young to do it. So they were horrible. I'm talking about 16 years old. Me. So, and the funny answer would be Ghostbusters.
Oh my goodness. Okay, why?
Because sometimes I believe, and I'm kind of serious when I say that one of the reasons I'm here is because of the movie and many other movies of that like, the period of time that made me love New York in a funny way. Like I really believe pop culture and stories get into yourself, and they marinate until they come out in some ways. So when I think, oh, why did I decide to move to New York? Sometimes I think, oh, maybe it was just for Ghostbusters.
I love that. Well, Ghostbusters is also a classic.
Oh, yes. But I really, like I was so obsessed with that movie because in my hometown, that's what I used to do, watching movies all the time. And I think I watched a movie an insane amount of times. So I had a crush on Bill Murray. I had all my thing, So
Okay.
there is a possibility that my obsession with New York started with that movie.
Okay. Ghostbusters. Thank you for bringing Bea to New York. Well, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your journey, your experiences. It was such a lovely talk.
I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And to all my listeners, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.